Today we are going to talk about APIs. It's one of the, if not the most important topic in React, because you simply use everything that you've learned in React. You are using use state, you are using other hooks, you are using asynchronous JavaScript modules, how to import and export components. So when you are using APIs or databases, you need all of it. And we will talk about it shortly. We will learn how to do it, but later when we build applications, we make more effort on understanding how does it work. Now let's talk about the 5 most common ways of how you build a website. A common way is to build it through a CMS, WordPress, Shopify, Wix, Weebly, or something like that, like you have it here. This is not that much of a development, but you could get into the development of WordPress or Shopify. Another common way is a headless CMS. This is where you use one of these CMS, whether it's a WordPress or Shopify or Strapi or Sanity, as a CMS, then you use your front end to build on them. In this case, you don't need to build a database or a backend, you just need to build a front end. Another common way is full stack but templating. So in this case, you build a database and the server, but the front end is just a templating language like Pug, like Haml, like other templating language, JSX. Another common way which must industry standard applications are built with this, where you have a backend, front end, then database. In this case, a front end is either a framework or a library like React. Then you have some other ways like serverless, where your server is somewhere else on the cloud like AWS. This is quite advanced topic, but you can also build microservices like many databases and backends and stuff, and even micro front ends. However, what's important for you right now is this full stack frameworks, like when you have a backend, a database of front end, or headless CMS. So these two ways are very common for starters to learn how to build websites. Now let's talk about how APIs work. Like, how do we deal with databases and how to connect to databases. Now let's say we have a database or an API, something like this. If we could make the font a bit bigger. Yeah. So an API or a database is nothing but a link. It's a link for you. You have a link where you connect to your front end. Let's say we have a front end here. Your React application connects to a database through a link. And now, if we try to connect these two, we have a URL. This URL most of the time is something like this: link.com.some stuff, something like this. So you have a database stored somewhere, either in the cloud or on your local machine. Then in your front end, you try to connect to this database or API through this link. But how do you get information from it? Well, from something called HTTP. Now, what's HTTP? HTTP is Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Hypertext Transfer Protocol is an internet protocol. We have many protocols like SSH, which is secure shell, is where two computers speak with each other and have some kind of access and authorization. We have FTP, File Transfer Protocol, when you transfer or when you deal with files. HTTP is for Text Transfer Protocol. It's when you deal with text. But how you deal with it? Well, you send an HTTP request, and this request is mostly like dealt with get, post, patch or update, put, and delete. So this HTTP request, when you are using it through your front-end library, you use a library to send one of these requests to your database. For example, when we use fetch, we could like make it where we decide on the method, which is either get or post or something like that. So we tell it this is an HTTP request to a database where we provide the link here, and then we specify the method. Of course, if with fetch, if you don't specify, then it's get. We tell the database either get us something or post something to this database or update something or delete it, and we give it an endpoint from the database. How does it work? Well, this HTTP request sends data and sends body sometimes. If it's a response, like if it's a request, then it could ask for information. For example, in case of get, let's say we want all the posts from our database and we have the link, which is database.com.post, something like that. Then we want posts, all the posts. We want you to get all the posts for us. There's a problem here because HTTP doesn't work well with just any kind of text or string. It has to be converted to JSON in order to understand it. So there are other ways, for example, XML. Sometimes in the past there were other ways. However, now it's JSON. So basically you push your request to the database, you get back some sort of string, then you convert it to JSON and you use it. This explanation is very important to know that whether you have a database, an API, external API, anything else, you access it through HTTP request, and when you get it back, you have to convert the string that you get back because HTTP only sends text, and text can be a string. So you convert it to JSON, then you deal with it. You will know more about this when we do the API. Now, we have this application which consists of 3 pages, an app, an index, and one component. So we try to call a database in our home component. The first thing you do, try to simulate the data, because database results could change. So it means we have to use useState, because React uses like state management to run database and stuff like that. So as we studied before, we use useState to say our database consists of posts, and we say set posts equals to useState, and which is an empty array for now, or you could make it an array of objects or anything that you want. Let's simulate a database or emulate, I don't know what is it called. ID name is Kareem and job is designer, and let's ID 2 Frank, and the job is a doctor, something like that. Your database returns an array of objects like this. So let's say we have posts, which is something like that. Then you do posts.map. As we said, array methods are very important. Post and then return something. For example, we return an h1, which is post, that single post dot name. Let's see what we see in our, well, we have Karim and Frank. Okay, but this is a fake database. This is not our database. So let's just give it an empty array and try to have a real API or database. So how do we have a real database and URL, and how do we connect it to this? Well, first we have to find the link, as we said. Let's look for a fake API JSON placeholder. We don't have JSON here, but if we go to here, we see that we have a JSON file. So let's store this in a URL, like, okay, const API URL equals to this. Okay, now this is okay. How do we fetch data from this link? Well, we use fetch and then API URL. Or you could just do that. You could just copy and paste this. Here we want simply to have to get data, but if you want post, then we need a comma, then a trailing object, optional object, and we say method post. However, we don't need this yet. We need get for now. So we do this API URL. But this doesn't work. Why? Well, this operation, as we said, is asynchronous. So we have to convert the result of this to a JSON. But if we do this, for example, if we do this, convert it to JSON, we don't know if the result of this action is finished before this is running. We have nothing to tell that. It's like you are going to a restaurant, you ask for food, and before they are preparing food for you, you are trying to eat. That doesn't happen. So in databases, first you ask for data, then you convert it to JSON, then you can use it. Well, it's pretty easy to do that. We have three ways to run asynchronous JavaScript. One of them is callbacks, the other is promises, the other is async await. Async await is just promises, but syntactic sugar and an easier way of using it. So we use async await. Let's create an async function, const fetch data, or anything that you want to name it, then an arrow function. Well, async. Now we have an asynchronous function. So we use fetch here. Fetch API URL or the string. However, in order to make it asynchronous, you have to put await here. Now we have the data asynchronously, but always stored in a variable. You can name it anything, but we have named it response. Now await response.json. This means we have the result of data in JSON, so let's store it in another variable called a result. Now we successfully have access to our database in the form of JSON. We can confirm it by putting result here, like putting this in our console.log. This still doesn't work because we have not called our function fetch data. Now when we call, let's go to our application. It still works, and if we refresh, we have our data here, which is hundreds of posts. Well, this is good enough. However, this is still unsecure because this function is called when we are not sure this component is mounted or not. So we have to have a way to make sure that our component mounts, and then this function is called. Well, React has a hook called use effect. This use effect makes sure that your component is mounted, then you perform actions that need your component to be mounted. So to use it, let's say use effect, you just say use effect, then called. It takes a function as a callback, and anything here means unless the component mounts, do not run. So when the component mounts, this runs. However, this is still not complete, because if we leave this empty, means anything that changes in our app, this request will run again, which is not what we want. We want to just run once and run successfully. So we do comma and empty brackets, which means this is not dependent on anything. This is just dependent on the component did mount, or when the component mounts, nothing else. If we make, for example, if we make this make it dependent on this variable, then whenever this variable changes or a change happens to this, this will run again. So if we have nothing to run against, then we don't have to use this. We have to leave this empty. This is quite good. Like, we have component mounts, we have access to database, and we run it only when the component mounts. But we still have no access to this result. How do we get access to this result? Well, we simply render our data result on this post. How do we render? Well, we learned we do it through set posts, then we make it result. This means set our posts or set posts to this result, which means make it this result, make it this JSON. Now, if we now run, let's take a look of our data before that, please. And we see we have title, body, ID, and things like that. Let's run .title and see if it works. Hopefully our app works, or we might have a problem. Yeah, our app works. We have titles, but let's make it like H3. And we have our app works. Let's give it an HR to after every title, and we see we have a horizontal line after every title. So we successfully connected to the database, used API. Now, this is a bit cluttered, this component. We said in React we don't need cluttered components. Every component should have a single task. So how do we render this on another component? Well, we simply make the component like posts.js, then we try this and say posts, something like this. We come to home, and instead of this, let's just say posts. Let's see if our application works. Yeah, it does. We have posts. But how do we send data, this data, to our posts? Well, we said we create a custom prop. Posts is equal to this posts. Okay, now this component has access to our data. So let's see if we can render it. For example, we create a H3, but let's let's just have our posts. Now we have like access to our posts. So what we do, we just say posts.map posts, and for every post return, let's make this a div instead of an empty fragment, because we need a key. Arrays need keys, so we say posts.id. Let's say S3, we make it a title, and the title after the title comes post.title, then H5, we need a body, then we say post.body. Then let's say we will do a horizontal line. So let's see if our application works now. No. What's map is not a function. Posts.map is not a function. Why did we not send posts? Posts, yeah. So you could have many problems like that. You just have to like make it work somehow. Let's see if we, yeah, now it works. I forgot to put curly braces around posts because we have to destructure it. And now we've destructured and we have our data here. So you could do this on another level too. For example, here in this component, you render your posts or you move through your posts, but then for single posts you have another component called post. But we don't do that here. I think you now have an idea about how API works. Later we will build applications and you will have a better idea about it.